Hey guys, today we're going to talk about different yarn weights. So I have an example of some of them right here. And I don't know if this is standard for all countries, but this is what I see when I go to the store in the United States. I know they've tried to make these numbers and systems kind of across the board, but if you live somewhere else, it could be slightly different. So the first yarn is a lace weight yarn, and this is one of the thinnest yarns that you can work with. It's usually used to make lace. So usually you use a bigger needle to make like really open work, really lacy things. And if you're looking for a lace weight yarn or your pattern calls for this, it usually has a 0 on it. So it's going to have this little 0 somewhere on it. The second thinnest yarn is called fingering yarn, and this is also called a sock yarn. So this is what you would use to make socks with more often than not. And it's going to have a 1 on it if you're looking for it. As you can see, it's thicker than the lace weight yarn. The third yarn is sport. It's once again thicker than the fingering. Sport yarn is usually used to make like baby items, but it can really be used to make anything. It's going to have a number 2 on this kind of yarn. Then there is DK yarn, which is often called light worsted weight yarn. It's going to have a number 3 on it. You would probably use a size 3 to like a 4 knitting needle. But once again, as I stated before, you're going to use the needle that gives you the correct gauge. And what I mean by that is that everyone knits at a different tension. So some people can knit really tight and they could get a whole lot of stitches in an inch. And some people knit really loosely and they get less stitches in an inch. So they need to find a different size needle to make sure that they're getting the same amount of stitches per inch that their pattern calls for so that their item will fit. So this was the light worsted DK weight. The next one is worsted weight. And this is the kind of yarn which I think most people use. It's like the most standard yarn. It's not super thick. It's not super thin. You can use worsted weight yarn to make anything and everything in between. And worsted weight yarn is a 4, and it can also be called Aran. The next yarn is chunky yarn. This one will have a 5 on it. It's a little bit thicker. You know, you're going to use a larger size needle, like maybe a 5.5 to like an 8 millimeter. I don't really use this yarn a lot. This is actually the only skein of chunky yarn that I own. The next one is called super bulky yarn, and roving is also categorized as a super bulky yarn. This is like a really thick yarn. It's going to knit something up really fast, be really bulky and really big, like think like a huge cow. There's also a 7th yarn that was categorized on the craftyarncouncil.com where they talk about the yarn weights and standardized systems. I don't have any of it. This is for, they say on the internet, it's called jumbo yarn. It has a 7 on it and it's used for arm knitting only. So it would be even bigger than this, and you would use it for arm knitting, which I've never done before. So those are all the different yarn weights, and if you're new to knitting, I would say you need to make a few things from a pattern first to get familiar with what kind of yarn weights that you like the best and what things you feel comfortable with. There really isn't a yarn weight that goes for a specific thing. Like I said, fingering weight is usually used for socks, but you can make socks out of worsted weight yarn. They're just going to be more chunky. So this is just a really beginning look at different kinds of yarn weights. I also made a video about yarn fibers because you can have any kind of fiber, like from wool to acrylic, and it can be any kind of weight in between there. So have a great day. Bye.